Welcome to Underground Strategy Podcast. My name is Max, and this week we are back with Alex, and we're going to talk about cartel tracking and other exciting stuff that me and Tony are not that knowledgeable about, but we are very excited to learn more. So welcome to the show, Alex. How are you today, and who are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm just basically somebody interested in certain topics that I believe to be underreported. So I recently started to post these events myself, and Max has followed me for a while. He's supported from pretty much the start of my page. So, and he invited me today to jump on the podcast. So here I am.
That is excellent. I have been following you from the start because you post quite different content. You're, of course, quite on top of most intelligence events we have, of course, Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, all of that. But you also have a very kind of a niche that we see a lot, especially today, which is about cartel activity, cartel intelligence, cartel tracking. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So yeah, it's something I've followed since I was able to use the internet, really. I mean, I was probably 12, 13 years old, interested in the topic. I'd say it started, I remember being 11 years old, and my dad showed me there was a kid arrested in Mexico. He was pretty much an executioner, and he was only like 2 years older than me. So that was just to see what's going on in that part of the world is crazy. And it's something I'd heard about growing up because my dad was Colombian. So there was a lot of stories that didn't end with happy endings, you know. Yeah, I've just been pretty much fascinated by what goes on. And then I've just followed it as it has developed, seen tactics evolve, different groups take charge. And yeah, it's just something I've been monitoring pretty much.
That's very interesting, Alex. And just for me and for the listeners who know very little about it, when you mention tracking and monitoring what's happening, are they open sources, open intelligence sources that you use, or are there other methods?
All open, either by direct releases from the government or local sources, local news networks, or what I do specifically monitoring individual pages of these actual cartel members.
And can you pick up quite a lot of intel from that? Like, can you develop quite a tactical picture of things?
These guys will tell you literally anything. They'll record themselves doing these crazy things. You know, they'll record themselves in shootouts, invading a certain area, looking for people, even, some of the gruesome stuff, which obviously can't really be posted, but it's there.
Just to give us a picture, we all know about the cartels, of course. Which are the main players? Because when I think about cartels, I go straight to Mexico.
Yeah.
And I guess that is a stronghold. But what are the main players, and are there any other countries that are involved in this bigger cartel picture?
So yeah, I mean, Max, obviously from your work, you'll know that Colombia used to be the hotspot, really, back in 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And that has pretty much moved to Mexico, most of the violence. And so the main players in Mexico right now, the biggest in terms of strength and financial wise is definitely the Sinaloa cartel. But the last few years, there's been a lot of splintering within them. So you might have seen recently one of the original bosses, El Mayo, Zamba, was detained. That was actually carried out by the sons of Chapo Guzman, they said he was the top dog, essentially, and he's been locked up. He escaped a few times and was obviously a big target. So they arrested him several years ago. And then recently, El Mayo was captured. And this was initiated by Chapo's sons, actually. And in the last few days, I've seen reports that Chapo himself possibly planned the whole operation.
So they were pulling a quick one on him.
Oh, yeah. that was interesting to watch unfold. I've never seen anything like it, to be honest. And the other main one is the new generation Jalisco cartel, which it started in Jalisco, obviously, by a guy called El Mencho. And he started off as just another worker, basically. He was like working in security for another cartel, which he married into. And over the last probably 10, 15 years has grown exponentially into the second largest cartel. They've just expanded like crazy, massive network, constantly trying to invade other territories, expand the business. And they're one of the more militarized ones. They've got a lot of, big heavy weaponry, a lot of armored cars, and a lot of crazy videos come from them.
Yeah, it is pretty, I would say, concerning, for folks in most countries to think that you could have like groupings like the Jalisco or Sinaloa cartels operating. And when you hear it on the news, sometimes there are clips on the BBC, one group having a full on, sort of military assault. It does kind of baffle a little bit, that, the mind that this could go on in a country where there should be state control. And do you find that a lot of the stuff you mentioned, that the Jalisco is more militarized now, do you find it's just that there's lots of access to weaponry, maybe former militaries or gang members or folks with some sort of training that gets involved in this thing, that there's sort of gun for hire culture?
I'd say that's definitely a part of it. But what to go into a little bit of the history, it wasn't so militarized until like the 90s, early 2000s. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but the Zetas cartel.
No, I haven't heard of them.
So they started off as kind of the armed wing of another cartel and then branched off into Iran. They were actually comprised of all ex-special forces who deserted from the Mexican army and a few from Guatemala, the Cartels. So they were ones who really started that whole push for militarization, and they committed a lot of atrocities. They would kill pretty much anyone. Big massacres, a lot of blood behind their name. And then on your other point about foreign instructors,
And
go ahead.
no, I'm sorry to break in there. So Los Zetas, and then did other people follow suit with that kind of militarized approach to the cartels?
Yeah. Well, of course, once your enemies are sort of using these special forces tactics, you can't just let them have the upper hand. So everybody else pretty much armed up, start using armored vehicles, heavy machine guns, which it was there, but it wasn't like it is now. Like you'll see guys now, it looks like a squad of soldiers. They've got all the gear, plate carriers, they got rifles with scopes and everything. Whereas back then it was just, guys dressed in civilian gear with some guns, just in normal soft skin trucks. So it's definitely been a push, and especially in the last few years. So new generation Jalisco cartel specifically has caused, I'd say, like a second wave of militarization, because you see them in their big armored trucks, and everybody else has to follow suit, essentially.
We have seen the news. We know that it's and what you're saying now, that people have been following suit in this militarization process, and that is natural. But how advanced are they? Because we're talking about, and I've been watching your page as well, and when you watch the news, because you see sniper teams, you see drones, you see all of that. It's almost like sometimes it's hard to differentiate. Is this from Ukraine, or is it? No, it was from Mexico. So they seem to be quite beefed up. How technically advanced are they, and how good are they? Because it also seems like they have a lot of experience and manpower resources that are not amateurs.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I mean, just numbers wise, they've got, every major cartel have upwards of 10,000 guys, and obviously most of them aren't trained specifically, but as far as the technological side, they were actually using the drones before Ukraine. Because, you know, I've got a post, it was mostly from 2020, 2021 of dropping munitions from drones on specific targets, you know, targeting these armored cars. They do penetrate, they do immobilize them. They've got they even do a lot of recruiting online. They'll have offerings for security positions, and then, you know, you turn up, essentially it's either you work for them or, you know, you go missing. So they've got, you know, they're online recruiting. They got the technological advancements drone wise. They've got, I'm not sure if you saw my post the other day on the counter UAS side with the anti-drone guns even.
I did.
So yeah, I mean, essentially whatever can be bought on the civilian market, they will buy it.
It is interesting what you mentioned, Alex, about the size, right? Because you mentioned 10,000, I think other cartels even bigger, right? Like, you know, just aids and assistance and, you know, even members maybe of the local community. Often in these cases, you know, people are paid.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, we know that they even provide the local services, right, over the municipality or whatever. So there's a lot of loyalty. And I'm just wondering, I know there was some debate about it a number of years ago that at some point are these cartels actually terrorist groups? I think, you know, Donald Trump at one point wanted to declare them terrorist groups. And I think the Mexican president at the time, López Obrador, said, no, don't. No, it was maybe too sensitive for him. But just thinking, you know, is that discussion still going on?
I mean, I think it's going to go on forever. Whether they will or not, I'm not sure. But personally, I would consider them terrorist organizations just from their tactics, how they operate, the acts of violence they'll do, because they do actively target civilians as well, and, you know, repress certain communities. So yeah, I'd say I would personally designate them terrorist organizations.
And when we talk about that, because they seem to be operating very freely and in the open, they're recruiting, they're posting. And I understand that, you know, you have seen, I don't know if it was last year or if it's been going on, you can see, you know, Mexican, primarily TikTokers or influencers, they are getting a bit too cocky and they mention them and they actually go after them and kill them with little repercussions. And how much pressure are they under, or can they operate freely, or how much pressure are they under from the authorities, and what do they do? I mean, what kind of measures are they taking? I know, of course, they are trying to battle it on the actual front line, you know, day by day, but are there any larger political measures that they are going to trying to implement, or is this just too big thing to do for the government?
I mean, I'd say the Mexican military, just the whole armed forces, are solid, honestly. Like the Mexican Marines, I'd say, are up there in terms of infantry worldwide. They've got a lot of good guys, but it's similar to Colombia. They held back, you know, human rights for the criminals, but not for the soldiers or civilians. So they're definitely held back. They've just got one arm tied behind their back, really. And as for operating freely, yeah, I mean, there's they'll have whole towns controlled, lookouts everywhere. So the moment anybody tries to make a move on them, they're gone. Yeah.
Yeah, and on that point about enforcement, I take your point that, you know, yeah, it's, you know, there's the Mexican authorities, but also we know the Drug Enforcement Agency is quite involved, or has been for a long time in Mexico. Do they have anything to say, or, you know, what's the view, if you know anything about that? You know, it can't be an easy task, right?
Yeah, I mean, the war on drugs is an unwinnable war, if you ask me. I'd say the DEA definitely cooperate with their Mexican counterparts. They help, you know, train and assist on, they provide intelligence. A lot of what they do is open source as well. And yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much you can do outside of an all-out war, really.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, because there's a market for drugs internationally, and someone has to supply that. I just wonder, if that level of violence is necessary. I mean, now we're going to draw into the social issues or whatever, but it just seems there might be something more there, right? Like whether that's deprivation or some kind of thing that, or plays for power or a combination of factors. Because it just seems that those are like small armies, as you mentioned, operating and executing massive authorities within a sovereign state.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's drugs or avocados, they're gonna do whatever makes them any money. Human trafficking does make a difference to them, really.
And I think with this, it feels like they have been moving away from the old school mobster territory, if I can put it generalized like that. And as Tony said, and as you say, they have this enormous violent capital at hand, and they seem to be straying. And I'm also trying to visualize what is the actual. I understand the power play, I understand the money play, but at this point they have to be so well equipped with money and everything they can buy with that. But they don't seem to be doing any large moves to power either, except for the local control. But maybe they already have as much power as they need to. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's just become part of the culture of them, honestly, because they'll do stuff they call it heating up the area, and that will include just massacring civilians for no reason. There's no purpose, no tactical advantage, just simply to spread fear.
Yeah, I believe maybe it sounds almost like there's the same. You can see the same tradition in other Latin American gangs, that it's more like a lifestyle, it's more like a way of living and a cultural thing within those organizations, and they kind of strayed a bit, even if, of course, money is going to be the main thing. But yeah, it's very interesting thoughts. And how do you see the future? I mean, it's very hard to do any predictions in this area, but do you have any feeling for the future? Is it going to be more divided?
So I think we're going to see a lot more in terms of the technological side, a lot of drone use, a lot of anti-drone use. And in terms of certain organizations, there's been a lot of kind of rifts between different organizations. So the Sinaloa cartel is currently at war with itself because of tension in the last few years. Essentially, El Mayo side is up against the side of El Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos. So I'd say might see some new alliances. There's been reports that part of the Jalisco cartel is now allied with the Chapitos side of the Sinaloa cartel, which could be crazy. Part of two of the largest cartels merging wouldn't be good for their enemies, essentially. A lot of manpower, a lot of finances behind them. So I think we'll see more of that, more cooperation between them, more internal conflicts maybe, and more technological advances.
You mentioned earlier the human trafficking, Alex, and I think it just impacts all elements of Mexican society. I remember, I'm a fan of boxing, and Canelo Alvarez was fighting, and at one point his brother was kidnapped. He spoke about it afterwards, and you just think like no one seems to be immune, or no one can escape it. And he mentioned how he had negotiated the release or paid whatever ransom for his brother. So is that still tactics they use? And are all rich people, or most rich people, victims or potential victims of this type of cartels?
I wouldn't say all, but it's definitely, they can target essentially anyone. I remember there was a few years ago during the elections, one of the officials in the state of Sinaloa, her brother was kidnapped during the elections. So she was told to stand down, essentially. And a more recent example, there was a mayor of a town in Guerrero State who was beheaded 6 days into the job. So
goodness me.
Yeah.
Violent stuff.
Yeah.
But it sounds, the work that you're doing is very interesting, Alex. All the us-in stuff that you're doing it's very interesting. It's an interest of mine because I don't have a lot of exposure to open source intelligence. But for our listeners that want to know more about your work, can you just give them some, something about your socials that they can, we'll obviously add it to the show notes too, but something from your end?
So yeah, I mean, I recently started my own page just to get some of these stories out there. I don't really have any big plan with it, just to, collaborate with a few different people, which I already have. The page has grown quite a lot, in my opinion, and I've worked with some other good pages, which I'm grateful for. And yeah, especially some that are focused on similar events. There's a few good ones. One about South American news in general. One called Asymmetric Intel, another good page. And another is an American veteran called Sierra Cadre, who's also focused on Mexico and Colombia as well, which I'm particularly interested in myself. And yeah, I'm just going to see where it goes, basically.
That sounds excellent. And we will put it in the show notes, of course. This is a vast subject, Alex, and the cartels are growing in different directions, both money-wise, size-wise, and with technological improvements. And I think this is something we're going to see a lot more of, and it's definitely underreported. So it is good that we have people that are interested in keeping tabs of this, because as we know, it's not completely risk-free doing so, especially if you are on the ground on the other side of the pond. So thank you so much, Alex. It's been a great pleasure having you today, and I think we have can easily have you on for plenty of more episodes to expand on this. So thank you so much for coming, and to everyone else, we will see you next week.
My pleasure, anytime. Thanks for having me.